Edwina, who was bilingual, was due to spend the autumn with him, but of course, she reneged. Why help you with your French when I could be running around with your girlfriend? So she and Yolo announced that they weren't really going to come and hang out with Dicky, please. They were going to go to Budapest because, of course, she needs to continue treatment, and apparently Budapest knew what to do with that Mediterranean worm. Dicky stayed on, alone, lonely, and miserable. And wouldn't you be? You know, you can't get your wife to hang around, so you get a girlfriend. Then your wife steals her. And not only that, but listen to this. Edwina wrote to Dicky and said, "I do hope you're not jealous." And she told Dicky that she and Yolo were sharing a room, so she just hoped that he wouldn't get himself too worked up about that. Well, of course, he was jealous, and he told her not to interfere. And then she has the gall to write back, and she says, "If you get into that sort of a mood, think first before writing, because you're asking for trouble." Look at who rules the roost around here. You know, he finally gets himself a girlfriend, but then this Casper Milquetoast lets his wife take his girlfriend, and then the girlfriend and the wife are shacking up in the same room and writing back to him and letting him know what's going down. And he's over there like, "I don't really like it." And she's like, "Bite your tongue. I'll tell you what you do and don't like. And if you keep that up, you're definitely not going to like what's coming next." Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise, and today we are going to be doing Chapter 9 of the Mountbattens. Now, you'll remember that in the last chapter we read, it was entitled A Terrible Scandal. And by our social mores, it wasn't exactly a terrible scandal. I mean, she's not doing anything that is any worse than anything she's done yet, but she was accused of having an affair with a black man, which was supposed to scandalize the entire countryside. I remain unconvinced that it scandalized the echelon of society in which she ran, but some of the middlemen of society might have been clutching their pearls. Regardless, that chapter was all about how she'd gone to court and denied it, and there was lots of evidence that suggested that she never knew the guy whose name she was linked with. And she went to great efforts to make everybody believe that she didn't even know that man. She said so in her private diary she didn't know him. She said on the stand, in a court case, she didn't know him. And yet, everybody else in her life seems to have known this person. So it is odd that she never bumped into him. I don't get it. But what I really didn't get was, meantime, she may not have been having an affair with Robeson, but she was having an affair with this guy named Leslie Hutchson, who was also black. And she made no effort to cover that up. They were constantly shocking society with their sexual aggression towards each other. And the scandalous way in which she behaved with him, far apart from the fact that he was a black guy, but simply he's a man who's not her husband. And, you know, Leslie is taking her to another room and flashing her, and she comes giggling out like a schoolgirl. So I didn't understand why she went to the effort to cover up and go to court and pay all these legal fees to cover up this one story that accused her of having a relationship with somebody who it was kind of difficult to pinpoint or define any kind of relationship that she'd actually had. The newspaper that wrote the story spent £25,000 trying to create and to find a connection between Robeson and Edwina, and was never able to do it. None of her friends said she had a relationship. Edwina said she'd never had any relationship. Later, after the court case was over and things had sort of settled down, rumors began to erupt that actually she did have a relationship with Robeson. He admitted it to a friend. And so there was like a variety of people who later came out and said, actually, she did. But it remains unclear to me why she needed to cover up that relationship, but she didn't have any problem with Hutch and her having a very obvious and infamous and well-known relationship for 30 years. So if anybody has any insight on that, I would greatly appreciate it, because I did not understand the effort placed on hushing this up, but letting this other situation fly its flag. Who knows? Okay, but this chapter is all about the way Edwina and her husband are trying to figure out how to be. They can't get a divorce, and I don't even think that either one of them necessarily wants it. It's an open marriage. Edwina can do what she wants, but she's a restless person. She doesn't want to be with Dicky. She doesn't want to be tied down to the responsibilities of being an officer's wife. She doesn't want to entertain his dumb friends. Meantime, Dicky's gotten his own girlfriend, and Edwina is clearly jealous that he is no longer sitting there penning his sad sack letters to her and has decided to move on to greener pastures. Weirdly enough, though, in this chapter, Edwina and the new girl, whose name is Yola, have developed this like real BFF relationship. You know, it's like best friends forever. And they're constantly hanging out together while Dicky's off at work. And I think Dicky is jealous of the fact that he can tell Edwina's trying to hedge in on his good time simply so that he can't have his own good time. Like Edwina's going to show up every turn of the way and, you know, we get to be best friends and we're going out to lunch and we're going shopping and we're going on vacation so that she can kind of own a little bit of this relationship and she's not on the outs of it. It's very twisted, very weird. But one of the things that I really like about this chapter is that we get some quotes from their two daughters, and those two daughters describe what it actually was like to be part of this family and to have Edwina for a mother. Cold as a dead fish, this one. And I don't think that her kids were all that sad when she was away. In fact, they say as much. So anyway, let's jump right into this. Chapter 9 says, restless and bored, Edwina now decided to go traveling. What's new? She decides that she's going to go to the northern Adriatic before joining up with Nada, that's her sister-in-law, at Wolf's Garden, and going on to the Middle East. She goes to Istanbul, she goes to Jerusalem, she goes to Damascus, Aqaba, Baghdad, Tehran, and she's traveling only with basic camping equipment and a change of clothes and using local guides. Slumming it is what she's doing, you know. Let's go slum it for a while and pretend we're poor. In Transjordania, Edwina chartered a light airplane for crossing the desert in Damascus, and she bought a car and drove the 600 miles to Baghdad, and at the buried city of Persepolis, she spent a week with the archaeologist Ernst Herzfeld. At the end of November, the two women dined with the king in Baghdad before returning home for Christmas. In the course of 3 months, they had covered 6,000 miles by plane and 4,000 miles by car. Dicky, of course, writes in his diary the same thing he writes every time Edwina finally decides to stumble in on his doorstep. Divine having the old girl back home. It's great having the old girl back home. The old girl's back home. Well, no wonder she keeps running out. If every time I walked in, somebody's like, oh, the old girl's back, I'd back right back out. Anyway, within 3 months, feeling depressed, Edwina was off again. But this time she decides to take Dicky with her. But this time she decides to take Dicky's girlfriend with her because she can't leave and let Dicky have a good time. Heaven forbid it. So she meets Yolo right outside Paris. Now, Edwina was not doing well. All of this slumming it across the Middle East had made her sick. And diagnosed with malaria and jaundice, Edwina dieted and tried to regain her strength. In April, the two women left for Cannes to meet Dicky's ship, but Edwina remained weak. And it was Dicky, not Edwina, who now danced the night away with his lover. Her spirits were only raised when So there she is, crippled by the malaria, sick, dispirited. Her husband's decided to dance into the night, not with her, but with his lover, which really would have chafed her spirits because she was always annoyed that he couldn't bestir himself to dance with her. But now suddenly with Yola, he can start clicking his shoes across the dance floor. Well, her spirits were raised when who should enter the picture but another strange man. This 6-foot blonde, blue-eyed Hungarian count, whom she had met a few months earlier in Budapest through Yola, arrived from Tuscany and took her to see the Grand Prix and Monte Carlo. I don't really know how to say his name. It's spelled S-Z-A-P-A-R-Y. We're going to say Zasbury. Anyway, he was a few years younger than Edwina, an accomplished tennis player and well-known ladies' man, and he became Edwina's new lover. She now resolved to go to the Clinic Low in Vienna for her troubles. It had the added benefit of being close to Hungary for weekend visits to Zasbury. Gotta have that lover close by. How's she gonna recover from malaria if there's not a lover close by? Edwina and Yola stayed in Vienna for 2 months. I don't know when Yola decided to drop in, but she's there. And they were there for 2 months, trying every possible treatment for Edwina's health. She was a mess. Her gallbladder, her liver, they weren't working. Her stomach, her intestines, they weren't working. The experts told her that she had picked up some kind of Mediterranean parasite and that the only thing for it was to just hang around in Vienna and wait for a cure. She continued, even though she was on death's doorstep, what with the Mediterranean parasites in her liver, bladder, stomach, and intestines not working, to enjoy all sorts of good times with the Hungarian count, but other rumors circulated. That same summer, in 1933, Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford had a divorce. And rumors began to fly with Fairbanks openly betraying his irritation as he was questioned about his friendship with a woman of title. That woman of title was, of course, Edwina, because she was often his escort to various things. I don't understand how she has all this energy for the lovers when she is constantly on death's doorstep with one gynecological issue or intestinal problem or headaches or this or that. Her health is precarious at the best of times, and yet she somehow always finds new energy with which to meet the demands of the many, many lovers. Okay, well, what's going on with Dicky? He's probably doing all sorts of things with his career since his wife is running around with every man on the planet. The book says that at the beginning of September 1933, Dicky began his 4-month naval interpreter's course in Paris. It was meant to provide a relaxation from naval duties, but of course, Dicky can't take relaxation. Please. Relaxation is a death sentence. And even though this was supposed to be a real laid-back experience, as always, he took it very seriously. And he's supposed to be learning French. So instead of just going to class and learning French, he started speaking in French, only writing in French. And the result was, of course, that when he took his interpreter's examination in January, he predictably came at the top of his class. Edwina, who was bilingual, was due to spend the autumn with him, but of course, she reneged. Why help you with your French when I could be running around with your girlfriend? So she and Yolo announced that they weren't really going to come and hang out with Dicky. Please. They were going to go to Budapest because, of course, she needs to continue treatment. And apparently Budapest knew what to do with that Mediterranean worm. Dicky stayed on, alone, lonely, and miserable. And wouldn't you be? You know, you can't get your wife to hang around, so you get a girlfriend. Then your wife steals her. And not only that, but listen to this. Edwina wrote to Dicky and said, "I do hope you're not jealous." And she told Dicky that she and Yolo were sharing a room, so she just hoped that he wouldn't get himself too worked up about that. Well, of course, he was jealous, and he told her not to interfere. And then she has the gall to write back, and she says, "If you get into that sort of a mood, think first before writing, because you're asking for trouble." Look at who rules the roost around here. You know, he finally gets himself a girlfriend, but then this Casper Milquetoast lets his wife take his girlfriend, and then the girlfriend and the wife are shacking up in the same room and writing back to him and letting him know what's going down. And he's over there like, "I don't really like it." And she's like, "Bite your tongue. I'll tell you what you do and don't like. And if you keep that up, you're definitely not going to like what's coming next." Okay, well, when Dicky's French teacher, Madame Khaled, announced that she was going to take an autumn holiday near Biarritz, Dicky followed her to combine his lessons and to see the Prince of Wales, who was also staying there. And it was in Biarritz that Dicky and Edwina were reunited, and where at a polo match, Edwina was to meet the great love of her life. And you're sitting there thinking, if you're anything like me, wait, what? I thought that she was with the Count guy, the Hungarian Count. Oh, she hasn't dropped him, but he certainly isn't the great love of her life. Who can keep up with all of these people? Like, I truly have lost count. And I wasn't necessarily trying to keep count, but it just doesn't seem like I would need all fingers and all toes in order to count how many people she's been with. But I need to borrow your fingers and toes too, because I can't count anymore. It's just too many. It's too many. Well, this joker who just came into her life, his name is Harold Phillips. Is he a total stranger? Hardly. He's the younger brother of the guy Ted Phillips, who she was all about just a hot second ago. But a better, younger model has shown up. And this guy is 8 years younger than her. He's a 6'5", square-jawed guards officer with a private income. He was a fluent Spanish speaker. His mother's family came from South America, and he was also an excellent rider and held a pilot's license. Where Dicky did everything with fanatical purpose, Bunny, so called because of his long legs and back, was effortlessly competent. Where Dicky was exhausting, Bunny was easygoing. It was just what Edwina needed, and he took on a role in Edwina's life that Yola had played in Dicky's, a reassuring presence for all the family. Interestingly, the daughters away, and they thought he was divine. They loved them some Bunny. Bunny was loved in our home, remembered Lady Pamela Hicks. She said, quite simply, he made my mother easier to be around, and he genuinely loved being with my sister and me. He had the imagination for wonderful games, into which she would also be drawn. When he was away, he wrote us warm, affectionate letters addressing each of us the wee wax, one of many pet names he invented for us. Bunny brought great joy to our lives, and I loved him deeply. He was a core part of my rather eccentric family, and although he was my mother's lover, they never displayed more than friendly affection in public. He would stay with us for long periods of time, and to us children, he was just a part of our everyday life. Well, my heart soars for those children that there could be an adult in their life who was not so cold. Now, I will say that as the book goes on, it would appear that Dicky, in his way, certainly tried to meet his children where he could, and he seems much more involved, and he seemed like he loved them since the day they were born in a way that their mother never did. So it's nice to know that where mother failed, Bunny could step in. It was time for another expedition, though, because we can only hang around with Bunny and the kids for so long. Adstein and the children were in good hands. Dicky was focused on his career in Yola. Brookhouse was still being built, and Edwina wanted time with her new man. Yeah, she's been with a lot of guys, but up until this point, it seemed like those were guys that were just kind of like people that she would attend to when she felt like she needed attention. They would come around to the family events. It said many times that, what was that? There was a guy that Laddie and some Hugh or something at the beginning of the book who she would bring around. He was both, I think, played on the polo team and stuff like that. So it wasn't like they were strangers, but it's definitely not like the situation with Bunny. Bunny is who she's all about. And they go on all of these, like this whole year is spent with them just traveling the world. And she cloaks all of these travels that they do together when she writes back to Dicky in these super infrequent letters that she writes back home to him. And she always makes it seem like they're traveling with other families, other groups of people, like it's this big traveling party of the elite going across the world. But more often than not, it was just her and Dicky having like these honeymoon times. Well, at the end of January 1937, she set off with Bunny to explore South America. And she was accompanied by Marjorie Brecknock and Jack Evelyn, who were supposed to be traveling as her chaperones. They traveled by train to Lisbon and then boat to Brazil in time for the Rio Carnival. On board, Edwina was so drunk from the Captain Planter's punch that she was only able to present the prizes for the game tournaments after some fortifying cups of black coffee. And from there, they flew on to Porto Alegre and Buenos Aires. Now, you guys, the number of things that happened to them on this trip, the author sort of just skims over them, but you could have written a book about all the crazy things that happened to them on this trip, right? So it starts off with her being stumbling drunk, and then they finally get to the Andes. They cross the Andes by horse, sleeping rough before returning up the coast of Chile, where they caught a train to La Paz in Bolivia. But while they were in Bolivia, they were caught in a local uprising when cadets from the military college took over the police headquarters and besieged their hotel. So there they are, gloomily sitting there playing board games, waiting for the cadets to forget they're there so they can sneak out the back door. And eventually, they were able to emerge and go on their way. So then they go on to the Incan ruins, Machu Picchu, before returning to Mayan civilization in the Yucatan. And who should they stumble across but Katharine Hepburn? What world is this? I mean, just what is this random happening? There you are, trip-trapping through Machu Picchu, and who should you stumble upon but Katharine Hepburn? Okay, well, they weren't impressed with her. They said that she was very disappointing off the screen with very untidy, lanky, reddish hair. Well, okay, Brecknock. That's the one who decided to complain about Katharine Hepburn. Who's going to look their best hiking up Machu Picchu, I ask you? One thing I think is interesting is the way they obsessively documented every mile they covered. You would think that it was like a competition. Like, are you trying to see things or are you trying to see how far you can go? Is this around the world in 80 days? I don't know. But she wrote that they, we traveled 5,771 miles up this way. Then we traveled 1,500 miles down that way. Then we went 7,271 miles this way. It's like, okay, is that, okay? I mean, maybe it's because it was at a day and age in which travel just was more difficult. I mean, it's not as though they're covering the place on covered wagon, but it is the 1930s, and everything is still very exciting. So I'm sure that the ability to travel so far in a several months trip was still shocking. So I guess I shouldn't act so callous, like, well, who cares? I mean, they obviously did. Meantime, what's Dicky doing? Well, some interesting things are going to come up in this section. We have not heard yet that there was any sort of inclination in Dicky towards the homosexual, but he does have a ton of friends who all have a bent that way or are openly homosexual. And in this passage, Dicky's not doing anything, but he certainly has some friends who seem like they have a penchant for flirting with him. It seems strange how often we see him bringing around friends who flirt with him and who seem like they want something more from him than just friendship. He's not brushing anyone away. This is very vague, this next bit, but I think this is the beginning of some deeper passages on the subject. In the spring of 1934, Dicky had achieved his first command, the very modern destroyer, HMS Daring. He was well prepared, having learned by heart details of the full crew of 140, so he was able to speak to every man as if he knew him intimately. He proved to be a fine seaman of tireless energy, intense curiosity, and unremittent drive, one former officer remembered. It was also said of him that in addition he was very human and approachable. We were a thoroughly happy wardroom under him, and this atmosphere radiated throughout the ship so that not only were we a happy ship, but an intensely active and confident one. But what I find interesting is that Peter Murphy, who by now had really begun to fly his communist flag, and who had a communist bookshop back in London, and Noel Coward, an open homosexual, had come out in June with King Alfonso of Spain and a 13-year-old Prince Philip. They went out in Lizard, water-skied, swam, and picnicked on the rocks of Gozo. The flirtatious, slightly camp relationship with Coward maintained with Dicky as apparent from his thank you note. And of course, it's not an admission of participation in homosexual activities just because a gay guy decides to flirt with you. So I'm not saying that Dicky is, having much of a bent or a penchant for that at this time. I'm just saying it's interesting that this is the way that his friends would speak to him. Noel Coward wrote, "Dear dainty darling, I couldn't have enjoyed my holiday more. Please ask Peter not to foul the guest cabin in any beastly way because I do so want to use it again. Please be careful of your zippers, Dicky dear, and don't let me hear of any ugly happenings at flotilla dances. Love and kisses, Coward." Okay, that's an interesting way to write your male friends. What's going on with Edwina, though? I mean, Edwina, I feel I am tired of her story already, and we have such a long journey yet to go. But it's always the same with her. Then she went to this place, then she went to that place, then she went to this place, met a new lover, then she went to this place, then she went to that place, then she went to this place, got sick too. Then she went to this place, then she went to that place, then she went to this place, got a new lover. It's like, all right already. In the autumn of 1934, Edwina was off again. Of course, she just can't stay home. She literally just got home, but nope. She spent all of the spring away. It's autumn now, but it's time to bestir ourselves and be off. So this time she goes to Southeast Asia. And the first stop was Canada with Noel Coward, where they stayed with the Governor General before being reunited with Bunny and Ted Phillips in California. Edwina pretended in her letters to Dicky, as she was wont to do, that she was hanging out with a large party and they were just traveling across the world and it was all such great times. But in fact, she and Bunny were traveling alone. And they were visiting ruins and temples of the ancient sites. They were seeing Cambodian dancers. They rented a Chinese junk for a 3-day cruise, swimming by moonlight and sleeping on the deck. From there, they went to Bali and Java. They flew to Singapore. They're doing all of this stuff. But what shocks me, here she is hanging out with Bunny, skipping across the east. And at the end of that, who should she go to but her Hungarian count? How did Bunny feel about this? I don't know. What kind of a lifestyle is this? How could you even keep yourself straight? Here she is running all over the world with Bunny, and then she ends up not with him, but with the Hungarian count. Okay, from the arms of one lover to the next, I guess. The reality, by the way, is meantime, while she's acting wild as a bullbat, we have the rest of the Mountbatten family not doing too well either. Now, you remember that Dicky had a brother, George. George was married to Nada. Nada has lesbian tendencies, and it isn't like a little secret. People have known about this for quite some time. But it gets way worse because it isn't a little sort of, it's not like gossip anymore. It's now full-blown world news what Nada's up to. But nobody in the family is doing well on either side. On Dicky's side, they got problems. On Edwina's side, they got problems. So is it any surprise that Dicky and Edwina also have problems? No, but we're going to put Dicky and Edwina to the side for just a second so we can discuss the crumbling relationship that is Edwina's stepmother and father and Dicky's brother and his wife. Briefly, let's find out what's going on with Wilfred and Molly. Wilfred and his young wife Molly had never actually been that compatible. Having served as Minister of Transport, Wilfred had been elevated to the House of Lords as Lord Mountbattens, and accordingly was less busy. So now he wanted to leave Molly because she'd served her purpose. But Edwina backed her stepmother and told him that he should stay. Why? I don't know. I don't understand why Edwina feels like she can just write her own rule book, but her dad has got to toe the line. Who could even know? But let's cast our eyes to an even more startling story. Now, as I said earlier, Nada and George have had problems for some time. Nada's got those tendencies, you know. George has known it these many years, but what's he going to do? Well, their difficulties became public talk when, in October, a custody battle, Vanderbilt versus Whitney, opened in New York. And it centered around who should have the responsibility of this 10-year-old heiress, Gloria Vanderbilt. Now, on one side, Gertrude Whitney was asking to have custody of this 10-year-old child. And on the other side, Gertrude Whitney's sister-in-law, who was also named Gloria Vanderbilt and who was the mother of this 10-year-old child, were fighting to have custody. The 6-week trial was a fascinating window into the lives of the ultra-rich and depression-stricken America. Young Gloria's father, Reggie Vanderbilt, had died of cirrhosis of the liver when she was 1, leaving nothing except debts. The young child had been brought up by her mother, who had moved in the same circles as her twin sister, who, if you forgot, was Thelma Furness, who had at one time been a mistress of the Prince of Wales. So it's all just in the family over here. Should it be any wonder that Nada decided to get in on some of this? During the trial, a chauffeur had testified about the elder Gloria Vanderbilt's several lovers, while her maid had given testimony that she had seen Gloria, quote, in bed reading a paper, and there was Lady Milford Haven, that's Nada, beside the bed with her arm around Mrs. Vanderbilt's neck and kissing her just like a lover. Gertrude was awarded custody. Rumors had long circulated about Nada's colorful sex life and her love of lesbian bars in Paris and the south of France. But here was public evidence. Gloria had been a frequent visitor to Nada's home, Linden Manor, near Bray, and of course, Nada was close to Edwina. So it's just not looking real great for the Mountbattens. You know, on any front, they are a mess, their families are a mess. Where can one turn for sobriety? There's no sobriety as far as the eyes can see. Everyone is just standing on the doorstep of hell. Okay, well, in the same month, despite the fact that the place seems to be falling down around our ears, the end of October 1934, Dicky left for Singapore as part of a plan to improve the quality of destroyers serving on the China Station, where he would exchange daring for a much older destroyer. This was disappointing to him because he had been on a top-notch ship just but a second ago. But now he's got to switch things out and he's going to bring his crew onto this clunky old ship, and it had been launched in 1919. The name of the ship was the Wishart. Accompanying him was his pet tortoise Andrew and, Peter Murphy. Now, what kind of world do we live in which you can just invite your friends to just come cruise around with you on a battleship? I don't quite understand how the Navy works. And why Peter Murphy, you might ask? We aren't given any enlightenment, but I've had my eyebrow raised to this Peter for a while. Initially disappointed, Dicky began to look at the positive side, telling his crew, "Our ship is called after the Almighty himself, to whom we pray every day. Our Father, which art in heaven." Oh, what an eavesdropper. Well, one of his first texts was to restore the morale of the men, which he did with onboard competitions, shows, a band led by Peter Murphy, a ship's newspaper, and films. He does always know how to get morale up, I will give him that. He set the challenge of winning every prize at the flotilla's annual regatta in September 1935, most notably by setting a shorter, faster stroke of 38 5/10 strokes a minute in the rowing, which he did, being declared cock of the fleet. It was not an approach that won him much favor on other ships. "He took all the fun out of fleet regattas," one former colleague remembered, "because he never left anything for the other chap. He had to have every trophy and then he crowed about it." That would be annoying because, competition is fun, but not when it's cutthroat. Because then it's just kind of like, calm down already. It's not the war yet. He encouraged the value of gunnery practice as a means of relieving the tedium of long periods at sea. Rather than rapid but unfocused firing, Dicky stressed the importance of conserving ammunition and precise targeting. He invented a new torpedo grab, replacing the previous system of a sling, and the Mountbattens station-keeping equipment that helped ships keep their distance when advanced abreast, which was eventually installed in 3 classes of destroyer. Dicky was always busy. No one will ever say that this guy was lazy. And some people really loved that about him, and some people really hated it about him and wanted him to just kind of chill out, Edwina being one of them. But as far as the way the crew felt about him, his tactics were not always regarded by other ships' companies as playing by the rules, and suspicions remained about his wealth and playboy lifestyle. But Dicky always stressed he played simply to win, and his own crew loved him all the more for it. Few other commanders knew everyone's name, kept chameleons, and a bear in his cabin. Edwina had picked up a black female honey bear, Rastus, on her travels for him to collect in Singapore, or ask for jazz accompaniment to hymn tunes on Sunday mornings. A hard taskmaster and disciplinarian with highest standards for himself and the company, he enthused the company with his own will to win. His innate qualities of leadership and initiative were at last being given full rein. So, you got to hand it to the guy. Other ships might have disliked him because, of course, when you're not on the winning team, it's easy to dislike the ones who are winning. But Dicky doesn't seem like he asked anybody to do anything he wasn't willing to do himself. He got there earliest and stayed latest, that sort of a leader. And it's really hard to dislike people who you see are working that hard. Edwina continued on her travels. After seeing her husband off at Sheerness, she left the next day for 4 months in the South Seas with Bunny, their 3rd long trip together, returning via Java, New Zealand, and Australia. To avoid any press comment, they traveled separately, arranging to meet up in California, where they stayed at Pickfair and met Clark Gable, Loretta Young, Charlie Chaplin, and Fred Astaire. Of course, Edwina was always inventing stories about traveling with people so she could write home to Dicky and act like everything was on the up and up, although why in the world would you believe that it ever was? As mail was difficult and cables expensive, Dicky was not to worry if he did not hear from her for a while. It was a story that Dicky chose to believe to avoid any more scenes. So these wild tales of her traveling with all these people and her excuses about, why she wasn't able to write more often and how, I wrote you a letter, but it just kind of must have gotten lost. He's just not here to ask any more questions. He knows the score. He understands who she is and how she is. Belaboring the point's not going to make his wife be who he had hoped she would be. Meantime, Bunny and Edwina pottered around the South Seas for 3 months, living off sea snails, lobster, fish, and sharks that they could spear or shoot. "I think the Pacific a perfect paradise," she told Dicky in the second of only 2 letters that she sent to him between December and March. They are not a married couple. Not that that's news. That's not exactly a hot take, but how in the world can she just abandon her responsibilities, not only to her husband, but to her kids? How can you just go for 3 months floating along in the Pacific, eating sharks and snails and lobster, just sort of sunbathing and sprawled across the deck with your lover? It just feels to me like your conscience would prick you at some point. Like at some point, are you ever going to think to yourself, I'm really losing time with people who I say I love? But maybe it just wasn't a priority for her. Like, why am I acting like she would have a conscience about that? If she had a conscience about that, she wouldn't be running away from her husband and her kids all the day, over and over and over. This is the 3rd 3-month trip she's taken in like a year. She's been home for like maybe 3 months out of the year. But the rest of it, she's been running around with old Bunny Wunny. By the end of April, she was back in Malta, having been one of the first commercial passengers to fly the Sydney-London route. She'd been away for 6 months. "Lovely having the old girl back," Dicky wrote in his diary. "Looking sweeter than ever." Yeah, I'm sure she is. I'm sure she's tan. I'm sure she looks like summertime coming in. But, Dicky, how can you be so blind? Does he like feeling less than? This is the thing I keep wondering. Does he like to feel the sting of failure? I wouldn't think so. I look at his life and I see how hard he works to not feel that way. So why in his relationship does he seem to like to marinate in this abasement? But Edwina was restless. Tell me something I don't know. Malta saps all our energy and ambition, she wrote in her diary, particularly in this weather, and we all become completely gaga. What is her definition of gaga? I would like to know. She disliked entertaining Dicky's colleagues and hankered after the freedom of the South Seas. What do you mean, where nobody needed anything for you and all you did was sunbathe all day and suck on a snail? Anyway, afterwards she disappeared to Rome with Bunny. Big shocker there. Though they were reunited for their 13th wedding anniversary, why? Dicky was soon on his own again, of course. At the end of the summer, worried about the growing political crisis in the Mediterranean, Edwina decided that she was going to take her kids to Hungary, where she thought they could be safer. Is that really why she went to Hungary, or was it to go check out what the Count was doing? Now, about 100 kilometers from Budapest, she found a hotel among pine trees and mountains that she thought might be suitable. And having settled them in with the nanny and their governess, she hightailed it out of there, so that she could go hang out in Rome with her friend Marjorie and then, scoot on over to Malta for a holiday. What? She hates Malta. So she drops her kids in the woods of Hungary and then decides to go back to the very place where her kids had been before. And now suddenly she's not so worried about how Malta is going to sap her energy and ambition. I think what she meant was the kids are sapping my energy and ambition. Anyway, I guess supposedly things were getting a little treacherous in the Mediterranean. Italy had just left the League of Nations and things were hot. The place is thick with barbed wire entanglements and the ships at war stations with warheads on their torpedoes, Edwina wrote in the autumn of 1935. 2 rooms in Costa Medina were made gas-proof, and on October 2nd, the Mediterranean fleet was placed on a war footing after Mussolini invaded Abyssinia. Whilst most of the fleet left for the less vulnerable harbor of Alexandria, Dicky remained as part of a small defense force. Edwina refused to be evacuated and, at the invitation of the port wireless officer, was invited to read the London news bulletins. She quickly warmed to her task, combining it with trips to polo matches and cocktails. She was beginning to feel that she could contribute and compete with her high-achieving husband. Well, I'm glad that somebody finally gave the girl something to do. I mean, if she's going to hang around, she better not get in the way. But be prepared to be slapped back, y'all. If this doesn't blow your hair back, I don't know what will. Finally, she decides, oh yeah, I have some kids that I left in the woods. I should probably go see how they're doing. Because at the end of November, alerted by the hotel owner that it was closing for the winter and the bill needed to be paid, she and Yola, what's Yola always doing hanging around, decided that they'd go pick up the girls, still in only their summer clothes, having forgotten exactly where she had left them. Okay, there's a lot many question marks. Am I to believe that the hotel contacted her and said, hey, we're closing for the winter. Could you pay your bill and pick up your kids? So she grabs her husband's mistress and goes, you want to go on a road trip? Let's go, girls trip. They pack up into the car and they start driving through the woods of Hungary only to suddenly realize, we don't know where we're going. I don't remember where I dropped my kids off. And am I to understand that the poor children in a Hungarian November were still only in their summer clothes because she had forgotten where they were and had not been able to send them some warmer clothes? My only question to this, because I want to believe every crazy word of this, is how is it that you can receive a letter from the hotel and they're like, hey, remember, we need our bill paid and can you come get your kids? How can you receive a letter, but you don't know where the hotel is? Could you not maybe look at the return address, get some directions? Is there like a gas station you could stop at? What about the Hungarian Count you know so well? Could he maybe draw you a map of his home country and maybe circle the general area where your kids might be? I don't know. But she manages to find her kids. As the Abyssinian crisis worsened, she decided not to bring them back to Malta, but sent them to stay with Uncle Ernie in Darmstadt. Okay, let's send them to Germany on the eve of chaos. From Darmstadt, she left for China. In Germany, she told Dicky that she'd met some charming people called Ritter, who had invited her to accompany them to Moscow, and were persuaded to join her in Bunny in a luxury car at the Trans-Siberian Railroad to China. I tell you all this as I like you to know, and you're so understanding, she added. Of course, Dicky saw right through that, and he made some little joke teasing her by saying that his German professor had met some Ritters in London. They must be imposters, she retorted. I mean, always making up these stories to cover, but why? Dicky knows the truth. Dicky knows that you just want to go hang out with Bunny, and you didn't meet anybody in Ritters named Ritters who wanted you to get on the Trans-Siberian train with them and gave you this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I mean, just spare everybody the lies already. Edwina continues to annoy me by her political illiteracy. She said, after having gone to Moscow, "It's fascinating being here again and seeing the progress everything has made since 1929, wrote Edwina to Dicky, at the height of Stalin's purges, might I add. "It's gone ahead by leaps and bounds. I gather shorter hours, higher wages, and lower prices, not only from what in tourists tells me. And the people on the whole are contented, and the young ones are happy and enthusiastic." Is she being paid to be a propagandist? What a dolt. All right, well, from Manchuria, Bunny and Edwina found their way to Peking before catching a ship from Shanghai to the Philippines. It's just, I can't read any more lists of names, okay? They're just taking their trips around the world. By the way, it's coinciding with Christmas, but can she bother her pretty little head to see her kids? Hardly. Alone in Malta, Dicky's poignant diary entry for Christmas read, "Had a bit of a servant's Christmas dinner on a tray." Total trash. I mean, what? You know what really shocks me? It shocks me that she thought that having a couple of kids with this man, Dicky, was going to be the silver bullet to their, marital problems. She never sees them. She never sees him. She's running around with Bunny. I cannot conceive of why she had kids other than the fact that society would have told her that was the next step. Like, you get married and you have a couple of kids. But I can't even begin to fathom why this rule breaker decided that that would be the social convention that she would suddenly approve of. Can someone explain that to me? Why would you have kids if you're going to run around the world with your lover, leave your husband to eat a Christmas dinner off a tray, and see not hide nor hair of your children? Dicky, as always, seems to have just accepted that Edwina was who Edwina was. And while he might have bemoaned the fact that there was nothing but some tidbits on a tray for Christmas dinner, the reality was her absences did bring some amount of peace. The book says that Dicky accepted his wife's wanderlust, her desire to pack in experiences of people and places, her need to escape domesticity, and him. Her unplanned arrangements were in direct contrast to his meticulously planned, and in some ways, he preferred it, leaving him alone with the children, free from her jealousies. She was very prickly, and we all had to be very careful of what we said in her company, remembered her youngest daughter. Sometimes it was as if we were treading on eggshells. She would be hurt by the most unlikely things, and then sulk for hours afterwards. In contrast, you could say anything you liked to my father, and I adored sharing a house with him once more. He was so inventive, constantly thinking up things that would make Patricia and me happy. Daddy was in a particularly happy mood, sharing memories of his own childhood days in Malta, when my grandfather was commander-in-chief of the Mediterranean Fleet. We explored the island with him, and he showed us the beautiful blue lagoons where we could swim, and he gave us a donkey to ride. My sister and I were also given a chameleon each. I named mine Casper, and would watch him for ages, endlessly fascinated as to how he changed from yellow to dark green. Now, by June of 1936, the Mountbattens were back in London, and able to move into their new penthouse above Brooke House, designed by Edwin Lutyens, with interior decoration by their friend Mrs. Joshua Costin. Their new home had 30 rooms, and was served by a high-speed lift from a tiny private entrance hall on the ground floor. At the top were Edwina and Dicky's bedrooms, bathrooms, and dressing rooms, and private sitting rooms looking out over Hyde Park, with rooms for staff and visitors on the side. The floor below comprised a morning room, drawing room, and dining room, again facing the park, linked with doors that could be opened for cocktail parties, a ball, or to be used as a cinema. On the south side was a children's wing. On the north, the kitchen and more staff quarters, together with offices for Stella Underhill and her deputy Nancy Lees. There were balconies on 3 sides, floodlit at the touch of a switch, the lower one accommodating 120 guests, the upper one taking half that number. The 2 floors were linked by a double-curved staircase in glass and polished chrome. Edwina's bedroom had been decorated by Rex Whistler, who had created 60 panels painted on canvas with fruit, flowers, cupids, and goddesses. against a backdrop of delicate grayish blue, as well as representations of Broadlands, Adstein, the old Brook House, Dicky on a polo pony, and a naked Venus with Edwina's features, watched by Father Time. You guys, this is a penthouse. Did you hear the description that I just read to you? This penthouse had a balcony that could seat 120 people. What in the world? I mean, I'm not saying that if you have the money, you should feel bad about spending it. Just the Lord blesses us all in different ways. So good for them. But I'm just shocked to my very core about the amount of stuff, of money. It's so lavish. It's so extreme. It seems so exciting. In July, after 2 months' leave, Dicky had joined the Naval Air Division in the Admiralty as assistant director, the first of his jobs in Whitehall. He had first learned to fly in 1918 and had always been a proponent of the importance of air power for Navy, and he was delighted. A primary responsibility was to bring full control of Fleet Air Arm, shared since 1924 with RAF, back to the Navy. Mountbatten enlisted the help of Winston Churchill, now the most important figure outside the government, sending him an 11-page memorandum on the subject in March 1937. His lobbying was successful, with the Navy achieving almost all it wanted. Coastal Command remained with the Air Force. In July 1937, a fifth Sea Lord was created to head the Naval Air Service. Though the decision was a political one, Mountbatten had played an important part in making the case. Another campaign was to persuade the Navy to adopt a new quick-firing anti-aircraft gun designed by Anton Gazda and constructed at the Swiss Oberleichen Works. The Oberleichen gun would fire a shell able to penetrate the armor of a U-boat. Dicky had first recognized the potential of the gun against dive bombers, especially the Stuka dive bombers, in 1937. But the Gunnery School Experimental Department remained wedded to the British-made Vickers multi-barrel 2-pounder pom-pom, seeing Gazda as just another foreign arms dealer. Dicky took Gazda round Whitehall, including to the first Sea Lord, Sir Roger Backhouse, but it was only in 1939 that the Admiralty ordered 500 of them. Alas, too late for the Norwegian campaign and Dunkirk evacuation. He also advocated that the Navy should, like the Royal Air Force, use Typex encrypting machines, which were faster and more secure than the ones they currently used, though it was not until 1942, under American pressure, that Typex was widely taken up. His experience on Daring and Wishart had stimulated an interest in improving destroyer design, and he had become friendly with the naval designer A.P. Cole. Now, at the Admiralty, Mountbatten was able to lobby for changes that included an all-covered bridge across the ship with a deep dropping covered catwalk, a slanting roof, and a windscreen, which meant, for the first time, those on the bridge stayed dry. He had also realized the morale-boosting benefits of being able to show films at sea, and many ships, partly through his efforts, now had sound projection. But the supply and quality of films was erratic. It was clear an organization was needed to source and supply films, and so, in April 1939, was born the Royal Naval Film Corporation. He had already deployed Noel Coward around the Mediterranean and home fleets to establish the sort of films the men wanted to see, and now he used his various connections to ensure they received them. The Duke of Kent was brought in as patron, and a series of lunches held at Brook House to introduce the naval hierarchy to film distributors and producers such as Alexander Korda and Daryl Zanuck. The result was that many now offered films for free. At the end of his posting in June 1937, Dicky was promoted to captain. He was 37, over 5 years younger than the average age for such a promotion. It was clear he was heading for the top. Well, that's good. Since his marriage, he is at rock bottom. But as always, his career trajectory is in complete opposition to the trajectory of his marriage. Oh, Lord, I just cannot even with these two. I have to say that while it is a compelling biography that is quite a page-turner, the consistency with which these two behave is beginning to wear on me a little bit. Like, it's wild, but it's wild the same every time. Travel, 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 lover, 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 working hard, working hard, working hard, and gaining a promotion. And I'm still fascinated. But I also think that while we're doing the Mountbattens, I think I might want to experiment with something that I tried yesterday that surprised me with how much I enjoyed it. I don't know if you caught last video that I posted, but I did a review of a very popular Netflix show, and I talked about the fact that it has been billed as a true story, but that I had some misgivings now that some of the characters from that true story are coming out and saying that the show does not depict reality. So I talked about that, and it was fun, and I think you guys enjoyed it as well. And I realized that these books are things that I enjoy and that you enjoy, but a wider audience would probably enjoy something maybe less. I don't want to say that this is intellectual, because I don't think that anything that I'm doing is highly intellectual. But I think that people might think that the book is harder to understand and comprehend than it is. And so they might not initially be drawn to this book review. So I think that rather than doing the Harry and Meghan thing, which I was really grinding my teeth over, and which I really felt like was subpar material considering I've already covered them twice on this channel, I was thinking that I might, since there seemed to be so much positive feedback from the Netflix review, I might start doing some show reviews, just to sort of mix things up. I think I'm going to stick with documentaries, stories that are supposed to be true, and the like, because that's kind of the theme of this channel. We do biographies and memoirs here, but I think that sprinkling in some shows, movies, and documentaries might be a nice change up, and it might mean that I don't have to go and grovel at the feet of Harry and Meghan for my, couple of pennies that seem to be thrown my way whenever I cover them by YouTube. I really feel like YouTube must have a deal with them or something, because I don't understand why anybody would still want to hear about them. But you so much as put up a thumbnail and you get 3 times, 4 times, 5 times as many views as you normally would. So I don't get it, and I really don't want to play into it. And this might be a nice way for me to sort of build up my channel and get in some viewers who might not be as readily interested in the Mountbattens, but who might still like my presentation style. Okay, I'm just always rambling at the end of these things. I know you guys are probably like, we don't care, do whatever. So sorry about that. It just sort of helps me to talk it out. Okay, I am at an hour now, and I haven't done an hour episode in ages, so thanks for bearing with me. Well, I will see you guys later this week. Bye.